Let's summarise what we did until now. Step 1. Click once on the rectangle tool icon and draw a rectangle. To modify this rectangle into a different shape, in other words, to reshape it, we need to convert it to curves. Reassuming Step 1, rectangle. Step 2, convert to curves. Next, we have to click on the shape tool icon, which allows us to manipulate nodes. We can assume that we convert our shape into curves the moment we exit the Basic Shapes tool. These basic shapes are rectangle, ellipse, and polygon. Well, that's not 100% accurate, but for now it's enough. So again, Step 1, rectangle. Step 2, convert to curves. Step 3, shape tool. Double click, release the mouse. The shape tool will allow us to modify our shape. Next, we use this tool to drag the corner. Double click and release the mouse button to add a node. Now click on the node, hold the mouse button and drag it. Click, hold the button, move the node. So when we add a node, we click twice, but when we want to move it, we click once. Hold the button and drag the node to a designated place. Remember that those are two different actions. You can't click twice and hold the button because nothing will happen. It won't move. You need to release the mouse button, then click and hold it, and again move the node. So, double click adds a node, while click and hold allows us to move it. But to do that, we need to release the mouse button after the initial double click. Next, click it, hold it, and drag it. If we click on the existing node, we need to move our cursor over it. And when we double click it, we'll simply delete it. So double click adds the node and also deletes it. We can also move this section between the nodes. We won't need this now, but it's a useful and correct technique. When we hover our mouse over the node, it grows and we can see some kind of X next to the shape tool cursor. Click, hold the mouse button and we can move it. And when we hover our mouse over the section between the node, next to the cursor appears a small icon, which shows that we can click on the section and hold it. And it will automatically, while dragging, select the two nodes. For now, we won't be dragging the selection. Nevertheless, it's a useful technique. Next step was check several nodes at once. Let's hover the cursor over it and drag it. So those are the things we did until now. We can now end our revision and move on to other things. Now, we'll talk about the zoom tool. To access it, we click on the icon with the magnifying glass. Next, we draw a selection and by releasing the mouse button, we zoom in on our document. Of course, we can also do that by scrolling the mouse wheel if we have one. Bear in mind that the cursor indicates the center of the screen, so when we click the point tool, we can still zoom in and out. Just roll the mouse wheel and zoom option will center itself with the cursor position. During this course, we will try to learn some of the keyboard shortcuts connected with the zoom tool. If we forget these shortcuts, all we have to do is click on the magnifying glass icons and read descriptions. We'll learn several useful keyboard shortcuts. Shift and F4, zoom to page. F3, zoom out. Let's select our figure. Now, by using the keyboard shortcut Shift F2, we will zoom the selected object so it will fit on the whole screen. So again, we click on the point tool, we select our shape. Maybe I'll draw a circle so we can see this more clearly. Now that the circle is selected, we press Shift and F2 together. Shift and F2 zooms the selected object by fitting it on our screen. Press F3. Press only the F3 key to zoom out. Finally, Shift and F4 zooms the whole page. So again, to zoom in on the selected object, by fitting it to the screen, press Shift and F2. That's Shift, F2. F3 zooms out, and F4 zooms in on the whole document. If we forget these shortcuts, all we have to do is click on the magnifying glass icon and use the icons from the zoom menu. Again, Shift and F2 zooms in on the selected object. Press F3 or click this magnifying glass with a minus on it to zoom out. Finally, Shift and F4 will zoom the whole page. So zoom shortcuts are Shift F2, Shift F4 and F3. Let's talk about another way to do this. Choose the zoom tool. Select the area to zoom it. We can see this option better. We can zoom out by clicking the right mouse button. Try it again. Select the area to zoom and zoom out by clicking the right mouse button. But this technique has one downside to it. It's only available when we use the zoom tool. There's also another way to zoom in. Select the pick tool. Press Shift and F4 to fit the whole page on our screen. Again, Shift F4 to fit the page to our screen. Now press F2 on your keyboard. The pick tool changed into the zoom tool, and we can now select the area we want to zoom. Once we do that, the cursor will switch back to the tool we were using before we pressed F2. Press Shift F4 to fit the page to our screen. F2 to switch to the zoom tool. Select the area to zoom, release the mouse button, and we're back on the pick tool. It's just another way to zoom. I'll use this shortcut a lot. F2. Select and it switches back. If I wouldn't do that, I would have to constantly switch between the zoom tool and the pick tool. Let's revise the shortcuts we've learned. Shift and F2 zooms in on the selected figure. F3 zooms out. Shift and F4 zooms the page by fitting it on the screen. Last, we'll access the zoom tool by pressing F2. Press F2, hold the mouse button and the selected area you want to zoom, release the mouse button and the program will switch you back to the most recent tool. Press Shift and F4 to fit our document on the screen. That's about all we need to know about the zoom option. Let's move on. Remember how we align the nodes? Switch to Shape tool, select two nodes. Look for the Align Nodes icon on the property bar. Once we have our cursor on the icon, click it. In the appearing window, check only one option. This means Align Horizontal, and click OK. Let's now learn another way to do that. Switch to Pick tool. On the left and up here we have the two rulers. If you don't have it in your program, access the View menu and click on Rulers. Let's repeat. View menu and click on Rulers. Move your cursor over the left ruler. Once we're on it, our cursor will change its colour from black to white. Don't click anything, just move your cursor. Now we're on. Remember not to click over this point here. Just move your mouse somewhere here. Click the right mouse button, hold it, move it somewhere near the figure and release the mouse button. This way, we've created a guideline. When our guideline is red, we can check its X position on the property bar. For now, we'll move it manually. So let's move it here, for example. Switch to the Nodes tool, in other words Shape tool, and click on our figure. Now let's try to move the node. As you can see, there's no change. To make the guideline affect our work, we need to enable Snap to Guidelines option. Guidelines won't be much of a use to us if we don't activate this option. Access the View menu, go to Snap to Submenu and click on Snap to Guidelines. Now, let's zoom it. Press F2, select the area to zoom. Let's see what will happen if we move the node now. Once we're near the guideline, the program will help us align the node with the edge. That's how we can use this. Press Shift and F4. Move your cursor over the top ruler and wait for it to change the colour. When it's white, click the right mouse button, hold it, move it, then release it. When we access the View menu, we can see that Snap to Guidelines is still active. Click on the figure to select it. Now we can click on the node and, when we move it, we'll snap to our guideline. Switch to Pick tool. Click on the guideline and press Delete to delete it. So we can align the nodes by using guidelines. We won't use this technique for now. I just wanted to show you how to make guidelines and talk briefly about how to use them. We should remember about activating Snap to Guidelines options when we work with guidelines. Otherwise, we won't be able to align the nodes with the guideline. Now let's deactivate this option. One more thing we need to remember is that we need to activate guidelines in the View menu to see them. If we don't check this option, the guidelines won't be visible at all. We'll now create this speech balloon. Choose the Ellipse tool, click on the icon, release the mouse button and move your cursor over the document. If we want to draw a proportional figure, in our case a proportional circle, we need to hold Control. Just hold Control and draw a circle. After the circle is ready, first release the mouse button and then the Control key. So when we draw a circle and press Control, our figure will become proportional. In other words, if we want our figure to be proportional, we need to hold Control. Remember that if you want to keep this circle proportional, you need to first release the mouse button and then Control. Let's delete this figure. It's the same with other figures, such as rectangle. Hold Control, draw a rectangle, and remember to release Control after you release the mouse button. Reassuming, if we want to draw a proportional figure in Corel, we need to hold Control. Just hold Control, draw a figure, and remember to release the mouse button. Let's now switch to Pick tool and select our circle. If we want to change the size of our circle and keep it proportional, just scale it with one of the corner transformation handles. Now, let's look at this part of the property bar. Here we can see the height and the width of a circle. Both values are the same because our circle is proportional. We can change the size of a figure by modifying these values instead of dragging transformation handles. To keep the proportions, we need to click on the little lock right here. This will lock the proportions of our figure. Let's input here, for example, 90 and hit enter. Thanks to the lock ratio option, both these values will change proportionally. If we scale our picture by these side transformation handles, our figure's size will lose its proportions. If we want to change the size of our figure disproportionately using property bar, we need to deactivate this little lock. Now we can change the width and the height without worrying about proportions. Go to Edit menu and click on Undo Stretch or Ctrl-Z. So we already did the first step. We've drawn the circle. Press F2 and select the area to zoom. Select the rectangle tool and draw a simple rectangle. We'll modify this rectangle and create from it a tail for our speech bubble. First thing we need to do is convert this rectangle to curves. To do that, go to Arrange menu and click on Convert to Curves. Now select the Shape tool. If the tool we want to select is the first position of our icon, we don't have to unroll the tool menu by clicking and holding the mouse button. So if the icon looks like this, all we need to do is select the Shape tool and click it once. Now move the cursor to the rectangle. We've already converted it to curves, so we can start modifying it. Grab this node and move it here and the second one here. Drag them to the center of the circle. Click twice on this selection to add a new node. If we want, we can choose two nodes and move them together. Just select them and drag them. Now we have two figures here. Switch to Pick tool. Now we can move our figure. Maybe click again and rotate it a little. Let's also move the circle. So, the Pick tool will allow us to work with the entire figures. We can also call a transformation tool or a cursor. Now we need to join these two figures together. Before we can do that, we need to learn how to select two figures. Press Shift and F4. There are three basic ways to select more than one figure. Here, just like in every other program, we can just draw a selection over the figure we want to select. To do that, we need to start a selection in a place where there are no figures. If you're on a different tool, please switch to the Pick tool now. Now click and draw a selection. Remember that the selection has to include the entire figures. If we make the selection like this, only the circle will be selected, so we need to draw a selection like this to select both figures. Reassuming, the first way to select more than one figure is to draw a selection, which will include these figures. If we do it like that, three figures will be selected. And like that, we'll select two objects. Two figures, three figures, two figures. Just remember that the selection box has to include whole figures. Another way to do this is to hold down Shift. Hold Shift and you can add figures to your selection by simply clicking on them. If we'll hold Shift and click on already selected figure, we'll deselect it. Just hold Shift and deselect these figures. As you can see, the second technique is very easy. Select the first figure and then add the others by clicking on them while holding Shift. Of course, we can use these techniques, Selection Box and Shift, in any other major software. The third way to do it and select these figures is to hold Alt. Press Alt and make the selection. Touch the circle. When you release the mouse button, the circle will be selected. Now let's make the selection touch two figures. So when we hold Alt, our selection doesn't need to include whole figures. It's enough when the selection box just touches the objects we want to select. Let's select these two figures. Now we'll weld these two figures by clicking the weld icon on the property bar. So let's click this icon and see what happens. As you can see, the two objects are now welded into one figure.